The evening had fallen quietly over Washington, D.C., but the air was thick with anticipation. Former President Donald Trump, the man whose words often sparked firestorms, was about to face an unexpected question that would leave even his most staunch critic speechless. As the cameras rolled for an intimate town hall, Trump sat across from a small, unassuming girl, a child with wide eyes and a heart full of innocence. She had been chosen to ask a question that no one had prepared for. And little did anyone know, this simple question would shatter the hardened exterior of the man known for his bravado. The question came, as pure and clear as daylight, "Mr. Trump, do you believe in God?" The room froze. The usually unshakable Trump, a man who'd faced global scrutiny and countless political battles, was suddenly faced with something far more personal than he'd ever encountered in the glare of the public eye. The audience held its breath, waiting for the trademark response, the words that had been rehearsed and polished for years. But what came next would leave them, and the entire world, speechless. Trump shifted in his seat, his usual confidence faltering, as if the weight of the question had broken through his armor. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, seemed distant, as if he were lost in thought. For a moment, there was only silence, a silence that seemed to stretch on forever, drawing everyone in. What followed was an answer that would forever alter the way the world saw him. No political spin, no rehearsed rhetoric. Just raw, unfiltered honesty. But the answer wasn't just a political stance, it was a revelation, a glimpse into the very soul of the man who had spent a lifetime in the public eye. It was a moment that would have everyone rethinking everything they knew about Donald Trump. Stay with us as we unravel this jaw-dropping encounter. You won't believe what happened next. The atmosphere in the room was palpable, thick with tension. The cameras that had been capturing moments of calm now zoomed in on the quiet exchange between Donald Trump and the little girl seated across from him. As the former president sat motionless, his usual bravado stripped away, there was an air of vulnerability that no one had ever seen before. It wasn't the image of the commanding figure that led rallies, or the man who stood at the helm of a nation. This was a different Donald Trump. The world, for just a fleeting moment, was going to see something far more intimate. The audience, packed into the town hall, sat on the edge of their seats. The question, a simple one, almost childlike, had cut through the thick veneer of politics, and now Trump was caught off guard. He could feel the weight of it, the pull of the innocence and the simplicity in the girl's voice. As he looked at her, he saw not just a young face, but a reflection of everything he had long kept buried. "Do you believe in God?" For a man who had spoken at length about everything from business to policy, it was a question that seemed almost trivial, yet at the same time, it was loaded with profound weight. The silence in the room grew, almost unbearably thick, as everyone waited for a response. The former president had faced international crises, dealt with scandals, and weathered public storms, but here, now, he seemed vulnerable in a way few had ever witnessed. For a moment, it looked as though Trump might brush the question off with a typical political answer. He could easily rattle off a line about his faith, about how God was important, how he respected all religions. But something held him back. The room was silent, and the question lingered in the air, unanswered. Trump shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He glanced down at the girl, her innocent eyes staring at him without judgment, her curiosity untainted by the cynicism of the world around them. It was then that something shifted within him, something deep and untapped. A man who had spent decades building walls around himself, now confronted by the simplicity of a child's question, was about to reveal a side of him that had long been hidden. With a deep breath, Trump spoke. But not the words anyone had expected. "You know, that's a good question," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. There was no sharp edge, no political bravado, just honesty. He paused, collecting his thoughts as the audience remained completely still, hanging on every word. Then, with a quiet voice, he continued, "I think I've spent my life building businesses, building an image, building walls. But sometimes, you forget about the things that really matter. Things like faith. Things like God." His words were slow, measured. The room was still, the tension almost unbearable, as Trump continued. It was a rare moment when the former president seemed truly reflective, no longer the brash, outspoken figure that dominated headlines. Instead, he seemed like a man searching for something deeper within himself. "I grew up in church, you know. But life takes you on strange journeys, and you start to think that everything is about power or success. But when you have to look deep inside yourself, when you really think about the things that matter, you realize that faith and the love of God, those are the things that really hold everything together." His voice cracked slightly, the emotional weight of his own words catching him off guard. It was as if the walls he'd built over decades were crumbling, and a new side of Trump was finally emerging, a side that had long been hidden beneath the weight of his political persona. The little girl, still staring at him with wide, innocent eyes, smiled. She didn't need any grand speech. She simply needed a real, human moment. And in that instant, Trump found the courage to be just that, human. The crowd, which had been holding its breath, erupted in applause, though many were left stunned by the unexpected vulnerability Trump had shown. It wasn't the kind of applause a politician usually earned. It wasn't for policies or achievements. It was for raw honesty, for a fleeting moment where the man behind the politician had been revealed. The camera zoomed in on Trump's face, and for the first time in a long while, there was no smirk, no attempt to manipulate the narrative. Just a man, sitting in front of a little girl, grappling with his own inner truth. The audience could feel it. For a few seconds, there was no division, no politics, no parties, just a human being who had allowed himself to be vulnerable. And then, with the faintest of smiles, Trump concluded, I think I'm still working on it. But yeah, I do believe in God. The simplicity of his words, combined with the sincerity behind them, was nothing short of remarkable. As the room slowly began to return to its normal rhythm, the weight of the moment lingered. The little girl's question had done something few had ever imagined. It had opened up a side of Donald Trump that no one had seen before. It wasn't the politician, the businessman, or the media sensation. It was a man, vulnerable and real, searching for faith in a world that often seemed anything but kind. What followed was an outpouring of support, not just for Trump, but for the sheer humanity that had been on display. A new narrative was born that night, not one based on power, but on something deeper. It was a moment of connection, of humanity, and one that would resonate with millions. As the evening closed, there was no fanfare, no grand exit. Just a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes, the most unexpected moments can shape us in ways we never thought possible. The tension in the room had reached a boiling point. What started as a quiet moment between a former president and a little girl had transformed into something far more monumental than anyone could have anticipated. It was no longer about politics, power, or public image. It was about something far deeper. Donald Trump, known for his unwavering confidence, was now navigating the most personal conversation of his life. Just when it seemed like the moment had passed, as the applause faded and the audience began to settle into its usual rhythm, the little girl, still seated with wide eyes and an innocent smile, spoke again. She had no intention of letting the conversation slip into casuality. Her voice, soft yet unmistakable, cut through the air. Mr. Trump, do you think people can change? The question landed like a thunderclap. It was so simple, yet so profound, and it was clear that the gravity of it hit Trump harder than anything he had expected. The smile faded from his face as his gaze dropped to the floor. He was no longer speaking as a politician, or even as a former president. He was speaking as a man, grappling with his own complexities and doubts. A long silence followed. The weight of her question was immense, and the room held its collective breath once more. For a man who had built an empire, risen to the highest office in the land, and weathered public and private storms, this was the question that forced him to confront his own truth. Could people change? Could he change? Trump, who had once been quick to speak, now hesitated. His mind raced, sifting through decades of choices, actions, and regrets. There were moments in his life he wished he could undo, opportunities where he had chosen pride over humility, power over kindness. Could he ever truly change? Or was he too far gone, a product of his environment and upbringing? Finally, with a deep exhale, Trump spoke again, this time with an almost imperceptible vulnerability in his voice. I believe people can change. It's not easy. It takes time. And it takes a lot of self-reflection. But yes, I believe people can change. His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something raw, something deep. Perhaps it was regret, perhaps it was hope. But in that moment, he had said something most people would never have expected him to say. The audience, stunned by the sincerity of his words, fell into an awed silence. There was no applause this time, only a deep, shared understanding. Trump's answer had come from a place that few had ever seen. It wasn't the combative, divisive figure many had come to know. It was the man behind the persona, speaking with humility. As Trump slowly raised his head, looking out at the crowd, his eyes glistened. The vulnerability was still there, but it wasn't a weakness. It was strength. He wasn't just answering a question about faith or change. He was answering a question about himself. I've spent so much of my life trying to win, trying to prove people wrong, trying to come out on top. But I've learned that the real victories aren't about being right or getting ahead. It's about the people we become along the way. It's about finding peace with who we are, with the choices we make, and with God. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke the last part, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though the weight of his own words was finally sinking in. The room, which had been tense moments ago, now felt lighter, almost serene. No one had expected such an answer, least of all the man himself. The audience wasn't just seeing a political figure, they were seeing a person, flawed, searching, and real. A person capable of change, just like anyone else. The little girl, who had unwittingly opened up this rare and unexpected moment, smiled softly. Her innocence had sparked something profound, something that transcended politics and power. In that moment, Donald Trump was no longer a former president or a controversial figure. He was simply a man trying to make sense of his life, like anyone else. And then, as the cameras clicked and the town hall began to draw to a close, Trump added one final thought, his voice stronger this time, but still tempered with reflection. I think we all have the capacity for change. I've learned that over the years, and I'm still learning it. I just hope I can make the right choices from here on out. That's what matters. The finality in his tone was not one of resignation, but of quiet determination. As the applause began to rise once again, it wasn't just the applause of an audience reacting to a politician's words, it was the applause of human connection. The evening, which had started as just another public appearance, had turned into a moment that would be remembered for years to come. A simple question from a little girl had unlocked something inside Donald Trump that no one had anticipated. And perhaps, in that small but profound exchange, both the former president and the audience had found something more valuable than power or success. A moment of true change, where vulnerability and hope had triumphed over ego and pride. As the final moments of the evening unfolded, the room felt inexplicably lighter. The tension, which had once gripped everyone, had melted into something warmer, something more human. It was a strange yet beautiful moment when the walls that had once stood between Donald Trump and the world seemed to fall away. The crowd had witnessed something they hadn't expected. The former president, a man often seen as larger than life, now openly grappling with his own vulnerabilities and searching for meaning in the face of a simple but profound question from a young girl. There were no more political statements, no speeches about policies or power. What lingered in the air was something far deeper, an acknowledgement of what truly matters in life. It was a moment of personal reflection, not just for Trump, but for everyone in that room. It wasn't just about faith, it was about the potential for change within all of us. Trump, who had spent decades building his empire on the idea of strength, now understood that the truest form of strength wasn't about power or success, it was about the willingness to look inward, to embrace humility, and to seek growth. As he stood there, facing the audience, his final words were simple but laden with meaning. I think we all have the capacity for change. I've learned that over the years, and I'm still learning it. I just hope I can make the right choices from here on out. The sincerity in his voice struck a chord with the audience, who had witnessed a side of him few could have imagined. It was a reminder that no one is beyond redemption, no one is too far gone to change. The smallest moments, the simplest of questions, can shake us awake and make us see things from a new perspective. In that fleeting exchange, something profound had happened. A man who had once been seen as impervious, a towering figure of power, had shared his struggle for meaning with the world. And through that vulnerability, he had awakened something in all who were watching. A reminder that change is possible, that growth is always within our reach, and that we all have the capacity to choose a different path. As the room began to empty, the story of that night would linger in the hearts and minds of those who witnessed it. They wouldn't remember just a politician on a stage, they would remember a human being, a man who, in his own way, was still searching for truth. And that search, that willingness to confront his own limitations and seek a better path, was something that could inspire anyone. So, as you walk away from this story, take a moment to reflect on your own capacity for change. It may not be easy, and it may take time, but if someone like Donald Trump can find the courage to change, to reflect on his own life and make better choices moving forward, so can we all. The smallest questions, the simplest acts of kindness, have the potential to spark something profound in each of us. So, wherever you are in your journey, know that growth is always within your grasp. You, too, have the capacity to change, to choose a better path, and to find peace with the choices you make.